Yo, people, welcome back to the YouTube channel. You already know what time it is. It's time for another Everything You Need to Know, because we are dealing with Badiashile, a player that is basically on the verge of signing for Chelsea. It's basically done at this point. Fabrizio's come and confirmed it. We've spoken about Ben Jacobs before on the channel confirming it. The deal is in its final stage. Is expected to be completed. Of course, the alternative, we think, to Vardiol, the cheaper alternative. And I had to get an expert, insightful person on, a guest for the first time on this channel, well overdue, which is definitely my fault at some point. Do you know what I'm saying? Joe Tweedie, absolute pleasure to have you on. I've always enjoyed speaking to you, and I've spoken to you on the byline. First of all, mate, how are you doing?
Yeah, really, really well, mate. Yeah, I think like everybody, super, super busy Christmas. I kind of, I suppose, forgotten what I'm doing with my life at this point before the new year. But yeah, just waiting for the football season to pick up back again and obviously get back into work. But yeah, things are great. And yeah, congratulations with the byline and obviously with the channel as well. So it's actually nice to make my debut finally. So I'm looking forward to this.
Appreciate it, bro. And let's get straight into it, because it looks like Chelsea are going to have a very, very busy window. Fabrizio has kind of confirmed that Chelsea are looking at a number of targets for a number of different positions. Vardiol was a player that Chelsea tried to bring in last summer, and you know, there was a little bit of confusion over a release clause and whether or not we could get the player ahead of time. He's obviously had an incredible World Cup, and now his valuation has shot through the roof, which Messi, of course, tried to bring down in that semi-final.
Single-handedly destroyed his reputation.
Single-handedly tried to help us all out, but I don't know if he's really done enough. But Badiashile has come up, and of course, as we was talking on air, Lawrence Stewart, a scout that we brought in from Monaco to help the recruitment team. And of course, Christopher Velver's coming as well from RB Leipzig. He's really making a serious impact already as well. Before we talk on the player, just how involved are the recruitment team, I guess, even though they're not fully formed in the early stages, because we still have Joe Shields, I think, on gardening leave, etc. Because we know Todd Boehly was trying to do like a director of football role. Just how influential are they already in the early stages, I guess?
I think if you look at some of the players we've been linked with and basically signed, like Andre Santos and Fofana, etc., you can probably see a little bit of change of tactic in terms of the sort of direction of the recruitment. I think I did an episode for London is Blue talking about the new recruitment structure maybe a week or so ago now. And, you know, these guys are incredibly sort of data driven. They're very big into analytics in terms of finding players. And I think what you'll find is that they will try to find that player before they make that kind of middle move that we've missed out on perhaps. So, you know, when Van Dijk was at Celtic, I think a lot of people felt he could be a decent player, goes to Southampton, has a good time there, and obviously then goes to Liverpool and turns them into a team that competes for titles. They're looking to try and find that Caicedo, that kind of player that maybe would typically go to a club and make that step up to a bigger club thereafter, when you're starting to pay your 50, 60, 70, 80 million plus of players. So I think you'll start seeing a lot more of a focal point on trying to bring in not necessarily lottery tickets in that they're massive gambles, but players that have huge potential that can come in at a young age, that they can develop, and that they can try and produce players who can almost step into the first team between the ages like 21 and 24, or target players in that bracket there. So I think you can see with the profile of players we're being linked to, people are actually signing, guys are being linked to quite sort of significantly in the press, that it's not always going to be that massive, obvious, big name signing now. They're going to try and look at players who they're familiar with, guys that are coming up in analytics, guys that they like the profile of. And I think you're starting to see, or you will start to see players coming in that sort of maybe 30, 40 million pound bracket in their early 20s, who are maybe one or two traits or one or two things away from being a really solid Premier League to Champions League quality player. And you're obviously hoping that they step up even further. But that will be sort of the talent identification process that they're going through now, is looking for guys like a Badiashile, like a Fofana, like an Andre Santos, somebody either incredibly young or who is maybe just on the cusp of stepping up to a team who is challenging for sort of that Champions League sort of title level player. So I think that's what we'll be looking at. But yeah, I think we're starting to see it now. I think you'll see that develop more over the course of the next few months when they're sort of fully formed and in place. But I'm actually quite excited by the people we're being linked to, and certainly the targets that we're seeing as well. Guys like Enzo Fernandez, yes, people know him after the World Cup, but people were aware of him when he was at River Plate before he moved to Benfica. Those kind of guys, I think you might see us make a move for them a little bit earlier now in their sort of footballing career versus, you know, waiting for somebody like a Bellingham to blow up at Dortmund and then try and sign him. It'll be trying to get those guys in a little bit earlier, see if we can develop them that way.
Yeah, because remember when Manchester United were trying to get Bellingham in from Birmingham instantly. Obviously, Enzo Fernandez has literally just signed from River Plate, and now 6 months later, we're talking about 100 million. So it's very clear why we're trying to bridge that gap between, basically cut out the middleman in many respects. Exactly, yeah. But yeah, in terms of this player, let's discuss him, because First of all, from what you've seen of him at Monaco, did you expect him to get a big move? It seems like as if he's kind of come out of nowhere. When people were talking about centre backs, obviously this is kind of one of the ones that you spoke about, maybe under the radar in terms of scouting and real recruitment. Did you see a big move coming for him by what you've watched in terms of his traits and his attributes?
I think so. So people that know me will know that I was a very early adopter in terms of stock on the Tchouaméni train, going back to when he was at Bordeaux, and I watched an awful lot of him when he was at Monaco. And I think Badiashile was one of the players that I sort of kind of gravitated towards in terms of his style, his ability to play in a back four and a back three, and just the general physicality that he has. I think the problem that he has, and again, this will happen for a lot of young French centre-backs, is that there are so many of them. You could go through, there's almost a list of 20 French centre-halves who could play for the national team, who are playing Champions League football, are regulars in good leagues and playing to a high standard. I think sometimes it's a little bit easy to get lost in that overall mix of just the general quality they have in that position. I think at Monaco, there was always, I think, certainly going to be a point where somebody would have taken a punt on him or like an intelligent guess. You don't necessarily get the blend of technical skills that he has, particularly distribution, his ability to carry the ball into midfield with somebody who is 6'4", has good change of direction, has a very sort of decent sort of defensive skill set as well. It was unlikely that skill set would go under the radar, potentially for as long as it has done. But as I said, I think when you've got you could literally go through maybe 10 people off the top of your head who are French centre halves who are fantastic. It's difficult to maybe get sort of the notoriety or the publicity that you would potentially want there. But for the sort of money that's being banded around for him, and obviously the alternative, spending over £100 million on the chap at Red Bull, I think certainly this again is probably a nod towards them trying to make a smarter use of resources. And again, we're looking at the Lawrence, obviously connections in terms of Monaco, using some inside knowledge there. I'm sure he has a better understanding of the player than pretty much anybody else in world football in terms of knowing them inside out. So I do think that it was kind of a matter of time, I felt, before he would go to either a PSG in France or go to a bigger league and play there. There were rumours that Newcastle had been looking at him, and that would be the sort of signing that I would see them make in them sort of bridging that gap between sort of a team outside the Champions League to a team that sort of perennially challenges for top four and pushes on. That would have been a move that I would have expected them to have made at some point as well. So it seems for me certainly that it's kind of the right time. By no means is he a fully complete fledged player in terms of absolutely everything that you would want to see, but from a pure skill set in terms of a Premier League centre back who can play in the two shapes that we often play, I think you would go a long way to be able to spend that sort of money and get somebody who is potentially as good as he can be.
And a lot of people are, I mean, from what I've seen as well, really quick, physical attributes are on point, so should have no problem playing in a high line. His ball playing ability, as you spoke of there a little bit, is that really one of the big pulls? Because, of course, Vardio is brilliant at carrying the ball out from the back. Levi Colwell, we know, is really good at bringing the ball out from the back. Koulibaly had a good switch of play with both feet. It seems like we've, in recent years, especially since Sarri, we've really gone down a possession route, and being good on the ball is vital. And especially if you're going to play in the back three, he's got to be comfortable stepping into midfield, being able to pass through the lines. Is that something that you see in this player that he can bring into the team instantly? Or is he one of those players that we bring in because he's on a cheaper fee and maybe he develops with us and he's maybe more of a rotational figure?
I think from a, let's say, like a technical standpoint in possession, I don't think really that there is too much for him to improve on from that sort of left-sided centre-back perspective. He has that ability to carry the ball into midfield. He's very confident in his ability to retain possession. You will see him almost kind of bait forwards into sort of press him and a little drop of the shoulder and push into midfield. He's got a great switch of play, very, very good switch, particularly from his left foot, in terms of finding that sort of arrow pass, or whether that's going to be to potentially a Reece James or any sort of player playing on the wide right for us. I think he has that in his locker. Really, really nice weight of pass again when you're looking at his ability to punch the ball through midfield lines and into either a Kai Havertz or a Mount or whoever is sort of playing on that kind of final line for us. So from a technical standpoint, I don't think really that you're going to see a player for this sort of money who has that kind of, I suppose, skill set really. As you said, with the physical traits, I have no doubt that, this is a guy who's 6'4", plays like a 6'4" player as well, has the physicality, great in the air, aggressive when it comes to tackling. I think if people want a sort of a comparison, he's a little bit like an Antonio Rudiger in that aggressive way that he likes to defend. And I think we've kind of missed that edge a little bit since he's departed in terms of having that character. He's quite happy to mix it up. He's quite happy to make challenges. Obviously, the flip side again is that he probably reminds me of Rudiger when he came to Chelsea. Maybe a few too many free kicks, a little bit too reckless at times. But that is, again, I think that's more of an age thing than necessarily something that is ingrained with him. But physical player, physical defender, very, very good left foot, very good switch of play. And again, I think sometimes when you watch Chelsea play, we're not always the biggest team, particularly on set pieces. And when you've got that 6'4" player in there, it does give you a bit more confidence that you're not just going to, put a team under pressure for 60 minutes, them score a very cheap corner, and then you're sort of chasing the game for the next half an hour. So he gives you that confidence as well.
Yeah, and I guess does that kind of work against him in weaknesses in terms of maybe he can be a bit rash? I feel like this season in particular with Koulibaly, he hasn't been as composed as I expected him to be. He's kind of sometimes dived in and picked up needless bookings. And then I kind of relate that over to Upamecano when I was keeping up with RB Leipzig when Ampadu was out on loan. And obviously, unfortunately, he didn't really get too much game time. Konate was there as well. So it was quite a formidable defense that he was trying to, get ahead of. But Konate and Upamecano, for me, when I look at Upamecano at times, he looks a bit rash. He looks a bit, obviously very good on the ball, very forward thinking, but can make silly decisions and be caught out. Is that something that you would say could be maybe a weakness in this person's game?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an eerie comparison, but I think certainly for Chelsea fans, that comparison to Rudiger when he came to Chelsea is very apt in terms of the way that he typically defends. The aggression is fantastic. The physicality that you want from him is fantastic. I just think sometimes it leads to him being a little bit overzealous when it comes to giving away like needless fouls, the kind that, the crowd are groaning because there's no real threat, but you've just completely relieved pressure, by giving away a stupid free kick. I think the only other real thing that I've seen from him in terms of defensive weaknesses that would probably be something he would need to look at in the Prem. There aren't that many centre forwards that play proper back to goal in the Prem anymore, really. Maybe like a Hairline can do it, or a Nunez, somebody who's got that physicality. But he does sometimes struggle, even though he's a big lad. He does struggle a little bit if a forward kind of pins themselves against him and they can roll him. I think that's something that he would maybe have to work on a bit. You'd hope probably, I think certainly the way that the Prem is gravitating with kind of smaller forwards and less about sort of physicality in a true number 9 position, that you would hope that would be less of an issue. But certainly when it comes to defending, I think that is the one thing that he can get pinned by for example, like a Giroud or somebody would pin him quite easily, and you could work the ball into him all game, and that would be something that teams would target. I think that plus the rashness, are certainly things that you would want to iron out. But at this stage of his career for the fee, you're not expecting to get a completely formed player. I think they're looking to come in and develop those aspects. I think the one positive, though, from the aggression is that unlike some defenders that we have at the moment, he's actually quite comfortable defending in wide channels. He's quite comfortable defending one-on-one. He backs his pace. He backs his physicality. So from that perspective, you can risk it a little bit. You don't have to play your wing back so tight in. You maybe don't have to have that much sort of as much cover from a holding player because he is comfortable defending a bigger area of the pitch than what we have at the moment. So that's sort of the positive there. But I think, again, coming to the Premier, if he wants to assert himself and be physical, I can see certainly a bedding in period where he is giving away a lot of needless fouls because he is trying to be too physical with players. He's trying to win the ball too much, maybe trying to impress too much. But that is certainly something that, as we saw with Rudiger through the latter part of his time at Chelsea, once you iron that out of the game, you've got a guy who knows when to be aggressive, knows when to be physical, can play the ball, can play all the passes you would want from that position, can play in a back 4, can play in a back 3. Gives you a lot of flexibility. And for the fee, I would say again, would stress that the fact that this has probably come from Lawrence in terms of the direction here, a player that he would know very well. I think we're getting probably somebody who can be a starting caliber player for Chelsea, so even for the rest of the season. But I think as his career will progress, as those mistakes, as that defensive IQ improves, as the intelligence of when to be aggressive, when to hold, sort of improves, particularly if you can get another season out of Thiago Silva, have that sort of mentorship of the sort of defensive side of the game. You're looking at a player who has every tool in the box to be a really top level Premier League centre half. Yeah.
And I think obviously from the physical attributes, he's ticking those boxes. From the technical attributes, he's ticking those boxes. And like you said, young defender, he'll need time. He'll have to be improving along the way. We saw Christensen, another example of someone that at a young age was making a few errors. The Barcelona one, the famous one. But as time went on, he kind of became a very, very polished centre-back. I was wondering what you thought of what this means for Chelsea going into the future in terms of the centre-backs with Koulibaly's future, even though he's just arrived. Silva, who, according to reports, could be getting an extension on the contract. Chelsea really highly value him. He could end up staying for another year, even if it's of that John Terry, Antonio Conte title-winning season kind of role where he's behind the scenes giving that leadership. Levi Colwill, of course, is now starting to play regularly for Brighton after Webster's injury. He's looking really good, a player that I rate really, really highly. I think everybody who knows the academy, even a smidge of it, knows how talented Levi Colwill is, kind of the perfect build for a centre-back. I know you absolutely love the guy. So and Fofana and Trevor, what do you think Chelsea's, I guess, centre backs will look like in the coming years in terms of the winners and losers of a deal like this?
I think the loser was probably the first guy you mentioned, Koulibaly. I've not been super impressed with him since he's come in. I think there is maybe an element of maybe coming to the Prem a little bit too late in his career, and I don't think you can use the physical traits that he had in Serie A. You can't use them as effectively in the Prem because everybody's got pace, everybody's got physicality whenever you play against teams. So I think he maybe is the one at most risk. And the way that I'm from an ideal scenario from my perspective, would you basically retain Thiago Silva for as long as he can play. You know, you wheel him out in the Champions League, you wheel him out in big games to be sort of that sort of keystone figure at the back. But you let him mentor a Colwill, Fofana, Chalobah, and Badiashile kind of quartet of centre backs. If they're playing three at the back, obviously, you know, you've got 4 into 3, potentially 4 into 2. We've seen with Fofana, you know, maybe that he has some injury issues. So there's always going to be places and there's always going to be competition for spaces as well there. The argument might be that they're all very young and they all want to play a lot. I think we've seen with Reece and with other players as well that are young, that injuries happen and that we'll have lots of minutes for players regardless. So I think having those 4 potentially with Silva as sort of the experienced kind of veteran, sort of guiding the players, giving them every sort of ounce of knowledge that he has, that for me is sort of an ideal scenario. And, you know, I look at, again, in terms of Koulibaly, yes, you know, he sort of came in the summer and I think he said he's been an okay signing. I think for me, a little bit underwhelming, but you could potentially transition from him into 4 very sort of physically and technically gifted centre halves. So I think if you're looking at the back 3 as a formation Chelsea might play continuing in the future, or even shifting to a back 4, you know, you've got 2, you know, any 2 of those 4 give you physicality, they give you technical quality at the back, they give you passing range, they give you the ability to drive into midfield. So you've got 4 very modern profiles at centre back, with potentially somebody like Silva being that sort of mentor figure in terms of giving them all the knowledge that he's accrued through his career. So for me, that's the ideal scenario. But it is a young group, but I think from a technical standpoint, from a physical standpoint, you'd be very hard pushed to find 4 centre backs as young who have as much quality and as potential as having those 4 play for Chelsea next season. Yeah,
I've been really impressed with Trevor. I think he's probably been our best centre back for a large portion of the season. Obviously, we automatically kind of just go with Silva as that guy, but he's, you know, Trevor's been ridiculously good this season, so he's definitely one not to sleep on. And obviously he's in his 2nd season now, so he's coming with a little bit more experience and know-how. I remember his comments about the nerves that he used to maybe have in his 1st season, and, you know, the trials and tribulations of that middle part of the season where he started to make some errors. Maybe 1v1 was looking a bit shaky. Defenders always peak later on, or at least most of the time peak later on. So that's something to bear in mind with this young defense as well, if we were to have all 4 of them in the next couple of years, if Silva was to go, like you said. A question on Monaco and their style of play, and I guess France as well, they're under 21s. Back 3, back 4, you're saying he could kind of go between both. Is he somebody that you feel, and I guess the question is what formation are Monaco primarily playing and their style as well, but is he someone that is used to fluctuating between the formations in game tactically, or is he someone that maybe needs to be a bit more settled, have a partner? Of course, that's always the priority, but is he able to be flexible in that regard? Have you seen him kind of make shift between formations and partners in Monaco and France under 21s?
So, I mean, I think from Monaco's perspective, I think it's probably fair to say they play some version of a back 4, whether that's a 4-2-3-1 or 4-4-2, the majority of the times that they play. I've seen them play like a 3-4-1-2, 3-4-2-1, whatever you want to call it, and a few times an actual back 5, for example. I think certainly I like defenders who are comfortable playing in a back 4. I think they can transition over, certainly in terms of playing that left-sided role. He has the athletic quality to do that in a little bit more of a wider area. So I think from my perspective, the way that sort of Monaco play, it's very possession-based. He has a lot of touches of the ball. He does start a lot of their attacking moves from that sort of left-sided centre-back role. I've seen him play a back 3 a couple of times this season. He is the left-sided centre half in that role as well. So I think if he was coming, that very much would be, you know, left of a back 4, or the very left-sided centre back in a back 3. I tend to just find him. I think that he's a player for me. When I watch him play, he's got such a great amount of sort of physical quality. He's very agile for his size. He's very quick, for example. It doesn't really matter too much in terms of the shape they're playing. Like he doesn't need to be in a back 3 because he can't turn, or, you know, because he needs more protection from wing backs. He can play in a back 4. He can play in a back 3 where he's almost, you know, kind of defending the entire left-sided channel as well as his own channel at times as well. So he's got that ability to cover both. I think just from what I've seen, the few times I've seen him playing a back three, I think you open up slightly different passing angles and slightly different avenues for him to attack. So you might see him be a bit more aggressive in possession because he's starting generally a little bit wider when he receives the ball. And that switch of play to a wing back or a winger, for example, is tends to be on a little bit more when they play with their wing backs, or they play with more of a wide player on the right hand side as well. So it gives him a little bit more of an option. But tactically, you can see, and I think this is always the biggest compliment to young players, is when teammates trust him in possession, but particularly they're happy to give him the ball in difficult circumstances when they're being pressed, when they're under pressure. They're very comfortable passing the ball and letting him have possession and actually figuring out where to switch the point of attack. So when I look at certainly young defenders, I look at certainly the more experienced players in the team, or just his teammates around him. He is that kind of safety blanket at the back. They will pass him the ball under pressure. He will take control of the situation. I think, again, that is something that you will look for from a tactical perspective, because teams will press Chelsea. Teams will look to create, kind of overloads to press and to play high and to try and catch us when we're playing out from the back under Potter. So that aspect, I think, is very important as well, that he is very trusted by teammates in possession as well. So back four, back three, I don't have any concerns in terms of him playing either side. Doesn't necessarily need to rely on a partner so much. I think he's quite a proactive player. He's not sort of just an aggressive player who maybe needs a better player sweeping or a better player kind of marshalling about. He does seem to be very vocal when you watch him play. Okay. Very much somebody who can direct the play as well. So I think you're getting a good character as well as potentially somebody who could be a long-term starting centre-back at Chelsea.
Yeah, because I was going to ask on like leadership and communication. Obviously, Fofana's French speaking. I don't know if Trevor picked up any French when he was in Ligue 1, when he was with Lorient. Of course, we've got, like I said, Fofana. You've got Mendy in goal as well. Do you see him as, obviously, Levi Colwill maybe could be a future leader back there, but do you feel like he's got those leadership qualities in him that he could be maybe like a primary centre-back? Because I always look at centre-back pairings and I try and say a primary and a secondary. Who's the leader? Who's the one that's really, calling the shots? Because I don't feel like you can have too many cooks in the kitchen, or you can try at least, but we always knew it was Terry, then Carvalho, and then we always knew it was kind of, Ramos and Varane, etc., etc. And Rudiger kind of became that leader maybe for Chelsea, as his career went on. Do you see him as that vocal leader, or to partner next to maybe someone who's that vocal leader?
I think a lot of that will come down to his comfortable, or how comfortable he is in English first and foremost. He generally plays with a guy called Axel Disasi at Monaco, who I think is about maybe 2 or 3 years older than him in terms of his sort of regular centre-back partner, or guy that at least I've seen play regularly with him at least. And he does seem to be the one that is more vocal. If you watch, particularly when it comes to things like set pieces or general organisation, you can see the players who are more comfortable kind of organising and sort of dictating what is happening around them. And I think you often see that with him. The only real translation would be obviously the switch from French to English, how comfortable he is in terms of communicating in a second language. I don't know if he speaks English at this point, or how the sort of standard of his English would be. But from when you watch Monaco play, I think particularly, they have Youssouf Fofana in front, who played for France in the World Cup. Seems to have a very kind of positive relationship with him and certainly the guys around him as well. So I think you're getting in a good character. The hope would be obviously with the French-speaking players that we have, ability to get him up to speed in English as quick as possible. But I do think that you're looking at somebody that has probably at the moment in a younger kind of Monaco backline, he is sort of more of the sort of dominant player. I don't know how that would translate at Chelsea with Silva and whoever is going to be here in the future, but I think you're looking at somebody potentially that has that ability to command a back four in maybe 2 or 3 seasons' time.
And I have to ask, obviously, for Levi Colwill, do you think this kind of affects him in terms of, we've seen Charlie Webster maybe is now not going to sign that contract. It's been going on for a while. Dortmund, PSV are interested, maybe not due to money, because Chelsea apparently have an offer on the table, but due to the opportunity and whether there's really a pathway for him because of Andre Santos coming in and Carney's in there. And that's on top of Mason Mount and Gallagher's in the first team being promoted from Tuchel. So do you think Colwill looks at this move and kind of starts to question whether or not he's really going to have an opportunity, because they obviously play the same side, left side, both left-footed, both young, both on a similar timeline, similar like a Lamptey, Reece James. Obviously, in hindsight, you could have said, Lamptey, if you'd stayed, Livramento, if you had stayed, look at the injuries that Reece James is picking up. There's so much game time available, but that's hindsight. Obviously, just on face value, it's 2 young players jousting for the same position. Do you feel like Levi Colwill is not gonna hopefully react to that? Because obviously I'd love him to stay. And if it was a back 3, who would you play I guess, in the middle out of these two?
I think Colwill, for me, if they're playing a back three, I think Colwill goes in the middle. I think he's just the degree of comfort that he has on the ball and his ability to part, and just the quality he has in possession. I think is still, Chelsea fans probably still don't appreciate it, in terms of what he's doing for Brighton at the moment. But performing as he has done recently, taking his opportunities at his age, at Brighton, I think people will be very surprised when he comes back to Chelsea and the level that he can potentially hit. If I'm Levi Colwill and I believe in my ability, and I think certainly when you listen to him speak, when you listen to his anything in terms of his interviews, this is a guy who very much believes that he is a player that can play for Chelsea. I'm looking at Fofana, yes, big money signing, but has been frequently injured at Chelsea. And I'm looking at Trev Chalobah and then Badiashile as my competition. I'd be very confident if I'm Levi Colwill with the skill set that he has, the physical traits that he has, the technical ability that he has on the ball, that I would be very confident in my ability to start ahead of pretty much anyone else of those centre-backs coming back to Chelsea. In a back three, I think certainly that he would be the one that I would love to see take over the sort of Thiago Silva position, having a bit more time on the ball, dropping a little bit deeper, using that ability to either drive into midfield or to use that excellent range of passing that we're starting to see at Brighton. I think that is potentially where I see him. Trev or Fofana on the right, Levi in the centre, and then Badiashile on the left is a very physically gifted and technically skillful kind of set of defenders who give the opportunity not just to play. The only player who really passes out of the back at the moment, Trev does occasionally, but Silva's obviously the main guy with the switches, and Koulibaly will try it. But you've got three, I think, very talented, aggressive players who can both carry and pass. That does change how teams pressure you, because if you press Badiashile or Colwill and you mistime it, all of a sudden they're running into 30, 40 yards of space, and they have the ability to find the passes that are going to hurt teams. So maybe having three players with that quality and that skill set affects how teams press us, affects how teams actually defend us in general, rather than knowing that it's probably going to be Silva who maybe plays a switch or potentially Koulibaly. You've got three players potentially then who have that ability to drive into midfield, to play those passes. So I would be looking at it from that kind of standpoint. But Colwill, I think, is for me is a natural heir and successor in a back three as that middle role. But I also think he'll fancy himself in a back four and wherever. I think he has that confidence. So I think he should, given the ability that he has.
It's good competition, and that's
Very
what Chelsea are used
yeah.
to. It's definitely needed. I definitely can't wrap this up without asking you about January transfer window and guess your opinions on what you've seen. Obviously, Enzo Fernandez is what everybody will be, excited about as well, because he is the big potential signing, obviously on the back of the World Cup Young Player of the tournament, and it looks like it's going to be a mouth-watering amount of money. With the amount of players that we're getting in midfield, you've seen obviously Carney, now Andre Santos as well. We've been linked with briefly Kone, I think, Mönchengladbach, Declan Rice links are still there, floating about. Bellingham keeps being brought up, although I'd be shocked if that happens, considering Enzo Fernandez is now the priority. What do you think are the futures for the Gallaghers, the Loftus-Cheeks? Kante's contract renewal could be happening. Jorginho's contract renewal could be happening. I don't know what to believe anymore. What do you think are kind of the most likely outcomes for the midfield? Because it is way too many names. I haven't even brought up Kova, who had a great World Cup.
Yeah, I think this is probably the start, I think, of a long overdue transition. I think in terms of players that they're trying to bring in here. Jorginho, Kante's contract sort of running out at the end of the season. I think whether you try to renew one or the other, I think potentially it's going to be one or the other that gets a contract renewal. I think a lot of that will depend on what version of Kante comes back. I think, it's very simple. It's very easy to be oversimplify sort of the Chelsea's kind of league performance, but with and without Kante, we are a clearly different prospect, both domestically and obviously in Europe as well. I think he's such an, he is potentially the difference between coming in top four or not for Chelsea at times. So whether you get anywhere near that level of player back after the amount of injuries he's had, I'm not entirely sure. Whether Jorginho wants to go back to Italy or face a different challenge, he's done pretty much everything bar win a league at Chelsea. Can he go back to Italy, go play for Juventus or Milan or whoever, get that long-term deal and maybe play in a league that's more suited to his skill set? Kova, I think, is the one that I'm definitely keen on sort of retaining, sort of, in more of a longer-term capacity. Has, I think, shown certainly, this season flashes of real top quality and coming off the back of a great World Cup, and has that experience, has that, I think, that sort of nous that you would want from somebody there. I do get a little bit concerned for the likes of, I think, Gallagher in particular. I don't necessarily feel that we are really seeing a system that allows the best of what he does to sort of manifest, but that would require maybe a fairly significant kind of departure in play style for Chelsea. So maybe he is one that is on the fringes of looking to move on for the sake of his career. Loftus-Cheek, I think I would retain him for as long as he wants to stay here. I think he's a great squad player. I think, unfortunately, the injuries have probably cut the level of where I think a lot of us felt he might get to, particularly in that Sarri season, where he could be as a player. But his ability to play as a wing back, I think his ability to play at a decent level in midfield and at times have some very good games there. If he's happy to stay around and be that player who rotates in, I think he's a great option. When he plays, we do have a lot more physicality in the team. And I often say that's something that we lack a bit. So I think Gallagher maybe for his career possibly is looking elsewhere in terms of playing in a system or a team that is a little bit more used to or the ability to use his skill set in a better manner. And then I think, in terms of the names you mentioned, obviously Enzo Fernandez is the current golden boy in terms of the ability he has, what he's just shown in the World Cup there. If you think that he is going to be the guy or one of the guys in midfield, because I think we need at least two in there, one of the guys in midfield for the next 5 to 7 years. I think you pay the money. You just take the hit. You pay the money, and you say, okay, we're going to really, really sort of get behind him as a central point in the team. Now, I was going through some of WhatsApps. I remember mentioning, it might have been to Alex actually, that I like this guy Enzo Fernandez. It was in May of this year when he was still at River Plate, saying I actually really like this guy. I think he's going to do pretty well. So seeing him go to Benfica, absolutely smash it, and then smash it at the World Cup. It's not completely surprising, I would say, for people that watch a bit of South American football, that he is on the radars of clubs at that sort of price point. Again, hugely overvalued because of the World Cup, but that's the nature of the business and nature of the market. But I think has all of the tools, the physical traits, the defensive quality, the passing range, the technical skill set. And we've seen players from Portugal do transition to the Premier League pretty well. Your Ruben Dias's, your Luis Diaz at Liverpool, whoever it might be. Players who are very good there tend to be good players in the Prem. So I don't really think that he would come here and struggle. But, you would obviously, I think in the future, need to add some more quality there. Carney, I'm a big fan of. I'm curious to see where his future lies in this team. Is he going to be a box-to-box midfielder? Is he being used as more of a number 10? What sort of position are they going to put him in as well? Obviously, Mason is kind of flitting between all roles as he always does. And then, the Declan Rice rumours will continue to be there, I think, until Alex decides that they stop. I mean, again, another player who we've been linked with, and obviously, I think from it's not letting anything out the bag by saying that he seems to be fairly keen on coming here. So, it's an area of the pitch that's needed investment for quite a while. I've been surprised that we haven't really bought a starting caliber player there, because as good as Kova, Kante, and Jorginho are when they're fully fit, the number of times that's happened over a number of games, months, a season just hasn't been the case in the last 4 or 5 seasons. So I'm surprised that we haven't brought somebody in to be a potential starter and compete with those 3-4 those starting places. We saw how good they were in the Champions League run. We saw how fantastic they were as a trio. Maybe that hasn't always carried over to the Prem for a variety of reasons. But I think that, as I said, the investment is going to come. I think certainly, if they get Fernandez over the line, that's, for me, is a very good start, because naturally, kickstarts us in the second half of the season. We desperately need to close the gap on the top 4. For me, that's still a very, very significant point that we need to finish in the top 4 to recruit well in the summer. But then, with guys like Fernandez potentially coming in, I love Andre Santos. I think he is possibly, if his career goes as sort of the trajectory would sort of indicate, you're looking at a very, very special kind of box-to-box player there as well. All of the skill, all of the Brazilian flair, but with somebody who also likes flying into tackles and is very aggressive. And he's kind of like a weird Ramirez. If Ramirez had tons of flair, he's just got this kind of silky ability to dribble through midfield, and he's got tricks and great feet. But, the ball winning, the tackling, the aggression, the physicality is there as well. So, again, another great signing. It puts us in a position where I don't think we would have had going into next season if we get Fernandez and we maybe sign another starting caliber player in the summer. We've gone from, an area of the pitch that I think has been the weakest for a number of years to possibly being the biggest strength in the team.
Yeah, and to finalize on that, I guess there's a balance between healthy competition and unhealthy competition, and I guess to continue to keep convincing these young players that there's a pathway and there's a plan and there's a clear route for them to actually play in the first team. You have to, I guess, pick and choose who you're going to go for and not go for everyone, because I think when you sign an Andre Santos and you sign a Carney, if you then go and get a Bellingham and you've got a Mount, it then starts to overlap a little bit, and you start to think, well, did they lie to me? So it will be an interesting one to see who else is on that list. I do think that there is still no 6 really that's been signed. Obviously, Enzo doesn't really fall into that bracket for me either. All of these other midfielders have been box-to-box midfielders or potentially 10s. And that is a big weakness in the team. Obviously, Zakaria is doing a job at the moment, but I don't really feel like, from what I've seen so far, which is very little because he's barely played, but I still think we can get a lot better in terms of that. He's a good stopgap, good loan, good squad player to use for this season. He's bringing the P&P that a lot of people have craved and missed, seeing some good recovery tackles in the last game. But I think in terms of passing and in terms of, technical ability, I definitely think we can still push the bar even higher, especially when you're competing with the Casemiros, the Bruno Ramirez's of this world, the Rodris. You gotta either get players that have the potential to be them or players that are them. It's kind of, otherwise you're gonna get left behind. So yeah, I mean, it's been a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on, bro. And I guess short-term pain, long-term gain is what they would call it for Chelsea right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is. We've been through so many of these where people are saying, oh, we're in a transition season and then we end up winning the Champions League or we end up winning, some trophies or whatever it might be. I think this is the first real genuine transition that we're trying to make. You're seeing, I think, maybe a departure from older players looking to sort of really kind of build for the future. Obviously, you're not going to solve all of the squad's issues in January. I don't, there's not 400 million quid to spend in January. It's just impossible to do that. But I think certainly, this season, if they can get top 4, they can scrape into the Champions League. Potter's sort of first season, I think if he gets a little bit more accustomed to managing at Chelsea's level, kind of gets used to sort of the expectations and the pressure and develops a play style that isn't entirely dependent on Reece James being fit, then I think we can actually start to see sort of where the future is. We've got some really great young pieces. Well, obviously, I think in my opinion, the recruitment, even the Santos and Fofana signings are moving in the right direction. If you can nail this January window, you can get in a real quality player like a Fernandes, and maybe you can go out and find somebody who is a really able deputy to Reece on the right. And Badiashile comes in, 3 really good first team signings is a fantastic step in the right direction. But I think we are maybe another season, probably another season away from properly competing with the likes of City and even Arsenal at this point. You can see how long it's taken them to build, to have this sort of squad of players and to have the sort of form that they're having this season. It's taken them an incredible amount of time to get there. I don't know necessarily if it will take us that long. I think we're probably in a slightly better position. But I feel that this is going to be the transition where we finally move away from some of the older guard that we have. Some players will be moving on in the summer and starting to see a little bit more of a fresh-faced Chelsea side who can probably play the style of football that Graham Potter is trying to introduce, high pressing, high attacking, moving the ball, dictating play, having lots of players who are technical in all different areas. And at the moment, as I say, it is a little bit too reliant on Reece. We just had to watch the Bournemouth game. As soon as he went off, the entire momentum of that game shifted. He's such a world-class, impactful player. But you can only really do that when you have the midfielders, when you've got the centre halves, when you've got the 4 players to have that sort of impact on the game. So, as you say, short-term pain. I think if we can get to this season finishing 4th, I don't care how we scrape there, or it wouldn't be out of this world that this is a kind of season that we actually go and win another Champions League, because that sort of tends to be how we do things. It's not out of the realm of possibilities that we still do that. Yeah. But yeah, as I say, top 4, get into the summer, consolidate. Have that ability to go and buy the players that we want to and target the players that we want to. And then kick off from there. But, if you're backing a long-term mission, lots of fans have said they've backed it for a long time, that they want this long-term vision, long-term structure, then unfortunately that will come with some pain points early on. But navigating through them, sticking behind the regime, thinking that they're trying to go about this the right way, while bringing through young players, while buying young talent, while developing talent under a coach that hopefully can do that. I think, it for me it's not ideal where we're at the moment in terms of league position, but I think second half of the season, if they nail this January window, finish top 4, I don't think anybody can have any complaints. And as you say, moving into potentially a period where we can start really competing, every single year for the title, competing for trophies on a regular basis, and not just having those sort of one-off seasons, which we'd never, sadly, ever seem to capitalize on.
And FFP finally is something that's been talked about by rival fans. Are we aware? Well, I know we are aware because I've heard Todd speak on FFP at a conference before, but Chelsea, I guess they're really mindful of FFP when they're doing these deals and trying to make sure that they don't get themselves into another transfer ban, which we've seen 2 times, I think, under the Roman Abramovich era. Yeah. Are we flirting closely with the line, the danger? Because some people even ask, does FFP even exist and how does it even work, and why are some clubs getting away with spending a record transfer spend, and some aren't, so obviously Newcastle are watching their accounts. Of course, they're not in Champions League and they haven't been in Champions League, and these kind of things come into it. So are we flirting closely with that line, or are we okay?
I think we're okay at the moment. I think the one massive confidence that I have certainly in this new ownership group is that they will be absolutely on top of the numbers. I mean, you're looking at one of the biggest private equity firms, one of the biggest sort of financial firms in the world. Todd Boehly and the other co-owners are incredibly analytical. They're hugely into their numbers. They will know the financial side of things as well. Unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can have just some random shop in Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi in City's case, pull up a £300 million a year sponsorship, for no reason, which is unfortunate. But that is how these teams get around and circumvent the FFP regulations by just having a computer processor store on that literally is like a corner in the middle of a desert in Abu Dhabi that's giving them £400 million a year. That was part of the reason why City were getting investigated, was all of these insanely artificial companies that had only just literally been created and then pumping money into them. So there are ways of getting around the regulations, which I think PSG and also City and probably Newcastle will likely be trying in the future. We maybe have to be a bit smarter about that, but given the aggressive kind of commercial, I suppose, experience and just the general kind of ability to make money that Boehly has, and Clear Lake in particular, I don't have any real massive concerns about it. If they are spending big money, I think it's because they know that they're covered. It would be quite reckless of them to buy the club and then immediately put us into financial jeopardy in the first season. There is that saying you have to speculate to accumulate, but I think that they will do that with a view on the risks of the downside. I do think certainly that obviously being in the Champions League is something that they have to be mindful of. I think that is something to always keep an eye on in terms of the finances that come in. The difference between a Europa League and a Champions League in terms of money is absolutely enormous. The other thing I would say probably the last point on this is that in the summer, if the likes of Kante and Jorginho potentially move on and some of the older players, Azpilicueta, whoever it might be, for example, that's an awful lot of wages off of the wage book every single year. If you're bringing in younger players, they're not going to be on 325, 350 a week, for example. If you can offload players like Lukaku, I don't know if that's going to happen again, even for a small fee. Anything to balance the books in that respect as well. So we've still got saleable assets. We still have money that we can get off the books in terms of wages, which seems at the moment that it's going to happen in the case of a handful of players. But I wouldn't have any major concerns about things at the moment. I do believe Boehly and Clear Lake have a firm grasp on the sort of financial side. I don't think that they would be entertaining £100 million plus deals for players if they weren't absolutely certain. And the other thing you'll see is if Fernandez does come in, don't be surprised if it's like a 7-8 year contract just to spread some of that money over and make sure that we can actually afford it. So I think we'll be fine there.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Joe. Everything that I expected, insightful, very knowledgeable, of course, one of the best, really. And it's a shame that you're not a full-time content creator from what I can see. But where can the people find you if they want to hear more of your opinions and views?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got my own show on the London Blue podcast. It's called The Tinkermen. It's normally 1 or 2 shows a month, and that's with my mate Yasin. Always good conversations on there. We dig into everything from like the back office and front office stuff, so sort of the running of the club, into the real sort of detailed tactical stuff. Yaz is both a sports psychologist and a football coach, so has some pretty interesting opinions. I like obviously talking about the recruitment side of the game and also the kind of the way that Chelsea is run as well. So yeah, it's usually, I think, a pretty interesting podcast. And generally when people invite me onto stuff, if I have the time, I'm more than happy to jump on. So unfortunately, as I'm in my mid-30s now, I'm a little bit busier than I was about 10 years ago. So I try and jump on when I can. But mostly found on London Blue.
Yeah, well, there you go, guys. Make sure you go and check that out. The links are in the description. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts, I believe, as well. I check it out on Spotify. And like I said, make sure you follow Joe because it really is brilliant stuff, as always. And for me, this has been a great video. I don't even need you to tell me that it has been, because I know you're going to tell me in the comments that you've enjoyed it. But let me know in the comments. Smash up the likes. Make sure you're subscribed. And yeah, I'll see you guys for the next one. Of course, we play Nottingham Forest next. Previews will be dropping for that. Hopefully the Enzo Fernandez deal breaks and we can cover that and whatever else. So until next time, big up your damn selves. In a bit, people. Peace.